We have no intention of putting American forces or NATO forces in Ukraine. But as I said, there are going to be serious economic consequences if he moves.
Okay, so that little quote that you just heard, I believe it was yesterday from President Joe Biden, was a bit of a roller coaster ride. It starts off good. We're not sending in US troops into Ukraine. Then he says, but you don't want a but after that sort of sentence. But then he ends with, there will be economic sanctions. And in fact, he revealed that he's considered individually sanctioning Vladimir Putin if Russia invades Ukraine, which I could see him doing that. It seems fairly unprecedented. But anyway, look, we're trying to catch up a little bit on the stance of the US government, but also I want to talk a little bit about the conversation more broadly about this conflict, because I feel like there's a lot of missed signals, a lot of ships passing in the night in terms of this. So let me catch you up on a little bit. So Biden says if Russia invaded Ukraine, it would have, quote, enormous consequences worldwide and would be the largest invasion since World War II. The US, Ukraine, and other Western governments have warned that Russia does appear poised to invade. Ukraine says that Russia has amassed more than 100,000 troops along the border, and the Pentagon recently put 8,500 US troops on heightened alert over the tensions, although in his press conference, Biden was very strongly trying to pitch that as this is not an us thing, this is a NATO thing. Russia denies any plans to invade Ukraine. Now, if you look at the evidence, satellite images show ever-growing patches of snow-covered tanks expanding along the frontier, and a stream of Russian TikToks posts record the steady westerly crawl of trains carrying missile launchers, armor, and troops. Despite the buildup, Ukraine's leadership is playing down the Russian threat. They say there's been no change in comparison to Russian forces that have been deployed along the border as early as last spring. They said that Western countries and media outlets are hyping up this threat for their own political purposes. And they say that the move by the US and Britain to pull the families of diplomats out of Ukraine was premature, and that while there is a threat of Russia invading, it does not appear to be imminent. So, Jordan, what the hell's going on? What do you think?
It's a mess, and I think you touched on a key element, and a lot of this is Western media hysteria. But I do want to point out that like a lot of this revolves around Putin's objection or perceived objection to any Ukrainian membership in NATO. Now, just foreign policy experts have pointed out that that is so far down the line, if like maybe even not even possible, because they don't even meet the criteria for membership. So like if that is what this hinges on, it's important for people to take a step back and realize like this isn't really like a threat. You have Ukrainian leaders saying it's nothing to worry about, calm down. And you've even seen more tepid responses from Olaf Scholz in Germany, the new chancellor, and Macron in France. So look to less militaristic leaders in Europe who are more proximate to the issue on their stance than a really war-hungry United States. I mean, that said, this is, there's a lot of like bad blood from the Cold War. You certainly have hawkish foreign policy writers fanning the flames here. And at the end of the day, we're not in as to the extent that we were in the Middle East as much, but military contractors, weapons manufacturers, Lockheed, Raytheon, et cetera, they still need to bring, returns to their shareholders. So they're pushing for this. And what we've seen in Congress now has been criticized by more dovish foreign policy and pro-diplomacy folks as unhelpful. So you have Congress maneuvering to push all of this money toward Ukraine, which would make them the third largest recipient in aid from the United States. They would get in total around 700 million. They're at a rapid clip pushing this bill through Congress that it would have blanket sanctions on a ton of Russian figures that would make diplomacy harder and funnel a ton of money to Ukraine. And I think it's important that people take a step back and realize, is this something that we necessarily need to get involved in right now? And is this helpful? Because if this makes diplomacy harder, it's a net negative.
Definitely. Yeah, you're right. And look, I definitely agree that there are people, I mean, we literally see it happening right now in the House, that are going to be using this to spend a significant amount of money very, very quickly. That is definitely true. As you point out, they're gonna have this vote, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. The only countries, you mentioned that Ukraine would become the third, the only countries that receive more would be the $3.3 billion we send to Israel, the $1.3 billion to Egypt. Both of those numbers just seem amazing. I mean, Israel is a rich country with its own defense industry, but we give them $3.3 billion. Anyway, a lot of money does get sent out the door, and that might end up being a drop in the bucket in comparison to what we would domestically begin purchasing with this as the excuse. So I would never underestimate, especially with us pulling out of Afghanistan, and to some extent winding down operations in other countries, the American predisposition to waste a ton of money on military armaments. But that said, I've also seen a lot of like what I consider kind of faux anti-war arguments that Biden desperately wants war with Russia, and all of the Democrats desperately want war with Russia. And maybe I don't watch the channels that they're watching, but I haven't seen that. And that is different than, are we going to send them a bunch of money and are we going to spend a bunch of money ourselves? Saying they desperately want it, who thinks, like, I haven't seen a single thing from Biden that's warmongering in terms of actually producing military conflict with Russia. He could be sending his troops into Ukraine today if he really wanted to, like throw fuel on the fire. So I don't know, that seems like a weird, I'm always on the lookout for grifters, and I understand that some people in the need to talk about their favorite topic, sometimes they have to sort of make a straw man to talk against. I just don't see it.
No, it doesn't look like we're on the brink of an actual war. But like I said, they're funneling this aid. There's tons of weaponry and munitions on its way to Ukraine. We saw a headline the other day that was bragging about 90,000 tons, I think, of munitions and weaponry heading to Ukraine. I mean, those are sales basically for weapons manufacturers. So it helps them drive up revenue. And there's an element of that I think people identify, but they're conflating it with a full-on war, which doesn't necessarily, follow. It could just be yet another standoff out there. But we've seen kind of that type of thinking relayed through hawkish writers, and most recently in the New York Times last week, there was a story that kind of synthesized the conflict from, just how a friend of mine, Derek Davidson, just characterizes like a hack writer and one of the worst hack writers in the New York Times, that was objecting to Putin's sphere of influence around Russia, and that was something that we needed to take. And they were kind of implying that was something the United States needed to take on. Like, look, this is not. That is not our concern. That's, I think, what's really important here. The United States does not need to police influence and imperialism of other countries around the world, because we are one of the chief culprits of that. And that only makes things more complex, more murky, and ultimately more violent. So I don't know if we're necessarily on the brink of war. It could happen later, but this is ultimately about controlling Russia's influence, sphere of influence, as it's called.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I should have seen that. I'm old enough to remember how the media approached Iraq back in the day, and it was different. It was very, very aggressively pro-war. Some of those people still in media, they might want you to forget that was their stance back in the day. But anyway, we will continue to watch for this, because obviously, regardless of what happens, it's going to be consequential.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.